In 2022, a handful of the world's governments made a decision that did more damage to an economy than most weapons could, and they did it without firing a shot. They cut several large Russian banks off from a piece of financial infrastructure most people have never heard of. Overnight, those banks found it suddenly, painfully difficult to move money across borders at all. No building was touched, no soldier moved. A country was simply, quietly, partly unplugged from the world's money. The thing they were unplugged from is called SWIFT. This is a series about the companies that run the world and the rivals they left behind. Today it is SWIFT, and it is the strangest entry on this list because it is barely a company at all and it does not actually touch a single dollar. What it controls is something subtler and in some ways more absolute. It controls how the world's banks talk to each other. And when you control the conversation, you can, if you choose, simply stop someone from being part of it. Let me clear up the most common misunderstanding first, because it is the key to everything. SWIFT does not move money, not a cent of it. When your bank sends money to a bank in another country, the cash itself does not fly across the world. Instead, the two banks send each other messages, secure, standardized instructions that say, in effect, pay this amount to this account on these terms. SWIFT is the messaging system that carries those instructions. It is the post office of global finance, not the treasury. But it is a very particular post office because almost everyone uses it. SWIFT connects more than 11,000 financial institutions across more than 200 countries, carrying many millions of these messages every single day. It is not the only way for banks to talk, but it is the common language, the shared address book that nearly every serious bank on earth has agreed to use. And that near universality is the whole source of its power. Here is where its origins make the story stranger. SWIFT was not built to be a weapon. It was created in the 1970s as a cooperative owned by the banks themselves to replace a slow and error-prone tangle of telex machines. Its entire purpose was to be neutral, boring, and reliable, a shared piece of plumbing that no single bank or country owned. It is headquartered in Belgium, and for most of its life, it was about as controversial as a filing cabinet. And that quiet neutrality is exactly what turned it into such a powerful lever. Because when almost every bank agrees to speak through the same channel, that channel becomes a choke point. And a choke point, in the hands of whoever can influence it, becomes a form of control. To be cut off from SWIFT is not to lose one root among many. It is to be partially exiled from the entire system of international finance, forced back onto slow, clumsy, expensive workarounds, while the rest of the world moves on in seconds. That power was first used at real scale against Iran, whose banks were disconnected as part of international sanctions, and the economic effect was severe. Then more dramatically against Russia. And each time it happens, the watching world learns the same quiet lesson. This supposedly neutral piece of financial plumbing is, in the end, subject to political pressure. It can be turned into a wall. And if it can be turned against one country, then in principle, one day, it could be turned against another. Which brings us to the rivals. And here the story takes its most interesting turn. Because the greatest threat to SWIFT is not a better SWIFT. It is the fear of SWIFT itself. Every time the network is used as a weapon, the countries watching draw the obvious conclusion. They decide they cannot afford to depend on a system that might one day be used against them. And so they begin, expensively and urgently, to build their own. China has built an alternative called CIPS, designed to handle payments in its own currency and to give the world a channel that does not run through Western influence. Russia, anticipating exactly the cutoff that eventually came, built a domestic system called SPFS. Neither yet comes close to SWIFT's global reach. They are smaller, younger, and far less universal. But they exist, and they are growing, precisely because SWIFT was shown to be a lever that someone else's hand could pull. And that is the strange, self-undermining nature of this particular kind of power. SWIFT's dominance rests entirely on being the universal, neutral standard that everyone trusts to be above politics. The moment it is used as a weapon, it proves that it is not truly neutral after all. Each use makes it more powerful in the short term and a little less universal in the long term, because it gives every watching nation a fresh reason to build an escape route. Power like this can be spent, but not without slowly draining the very trust it is made of. So, the uncomfortable question this series keeps returning to has an unusually sharp geopolitical edge here. Is it stable or wise for the plumbing of global finance to double as one of the most powerful weapons in modern statecraft? A tool everyone adopted precisely because it was neutral has become one of the sharpest instruments of pressure on the planet, and its very use is quietly encouraging the fractured, multi network world that would eventually weaken it. Now, to be fair, none of this was Swift's own design. It did not seek to become a weapon. It spent decades trying to be nothing more than reliable, invisible infrastructure, and it was largely dragged into geopolitics by the governments with power over it, rather than reaching for that role itself. There is something almost tragic in a boring, well meaning cooperative discovering that its greatest achievement, getting everyone to use the same channel, was also the thing that made that channel worth fighting over. And that is the deeper lesson, in perhaps its purest form yet. Real power in the modern world is rarely about owning the money, or the armies, or even the roads. It is about controlling the standard, the shared language, the thing everyone has quietly agreed to depend on. Swift never moved a single coin. It simply became the way the world's banks agreed to speak, and in a connected world, whoever controls the conversation holds a power that no vault and no army can quite match.